building together diversity and standards. Imagine you are building something enormous. You have thousands of people working together. Everyone has a job. Someone makes bricks. Someone carries them. Someone builds walls. Someone checks measurements. Someone organizes the workers. And someone tells everyone what to do next. It sounds like the perfect team, but there is one very important condition. Everyone needs to understand one another. Now imagine that suddenly. You speak one language. The person next to you speaks another. The person giving instructions speaks a third. You point at a brick. Someone brings you a piece of wood. You ask for 10 bricks. Someone brings you 3. Very quickly, your giant construction project becomes a giant mess. And that is the strange lesson hidden inside an ancient story. Sometimes, having the same thing makes cooperation much easier. But here's the surprising part. In the real world, we also value something that seems to be the exact opposite: diversity. So which is better? Should everyone use the same language, the same tools, the same measurements, the same ideas? Or should everyone be different? The answer is, it depends on what you're trying to do. Let's begin with the story. In the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, people gathered together and began building a great city and tower. They shared a common language, and because they could communicate, they could cooperate. One person could give an instruction, and another person could understand it. One group could organize the work of another. Together, they could accomplish something that would be extremely difficult for one person alone. But then something changed. Their languages became confused. Suddenly, people could no longer understand one another. The workers couldn't coordinate. The project fell apart, and the people scattered. The story is ancient, but it raises a question that is surprisingly modern. How much does a shared standard help us work together? Why is a common language so powerful? Think about playing a game with your friends. Suppose everyone knows the rules. You say pass. Your teammate knows what you mean. You say go. Everyone understands. You don't need to explain the meaning of every word every time you use it. That's because you've created a shared system. Language is one kind of shared system, but there are many others. Imagine if every country used a completely different meaning for a meter. One person's meter might be 50 centimeters. Another person's meter might be 3 meters. Imagine trying to build a bridge using measurements from both systems. You would have a problem. So humans created standards. A meter means the same thing, whether you're measuring a table in Japan, a building in France, or a rocket in the United States. That's incredibly useful. So standards are invisible agreements. A standard is essentially an agreement about how something should work or be measured. You probably use standards all day without thinking about them. Time, measurements, traffic signs, electrical connections, paper sizes, computer file formats. Even the alphabet is a kind of shared system. Why are standards so useful? Because they allow different people, and sometimes completely different machines, to understand one another. Imagine buying a charger. You plug it into your device. It works. You don't need to call the charger company and ask, exactly what language does your charger speak? The physical connector and electrical standards allow the two systems to work together. This is called interoperability. Different things can work together because they follow compatible rules. The Tower of Babel has a modern version. Here's a funny thought. Imagine building a giant tower today. One engineer says, use meters. Another says, use feet. A third says, actually, I designed this part using my own unit called a tower length. Someone else says, my bricks are 17 centimeters long. Another person's bricks are 19 centimeters long, and nobody tells anyone else. You wouldn't need a magical language-confusing event to stop the construction. The project would fail all by itself. Modern engineering depends heavily on standards. Engineers need agreed measurements, materials, safety requirements, symbols, testing procedures, and communication methods. A standard lets thousands of people work on the same giant project without constantly reinventing the rules. In that sense, modern engineering is almost the opposite of Babel. The bigger the project, the more important coordination becomes. But wait, if standards are so useful, why don't we make everything the same? One language, one culture, one kind of food, one kind of plant, one kind of animal, one way of solving every problem. Wouldn't that make everything easier? Not necessarily. Because now we run into the other side of the story. Diversity. Diversity can be powerful. Imagine a classroom where everyone thinks exactly the same way. You ask, what should we do? Everyone gives exactly the same answer. You ask, does anyone have another idea? Everyone says nope. That might make decision-making very fast. But it has a weakness. What if the first idea is wrong? If everyone thinks the same way, nobody may notice. Now imagine a different classroom. One student loves mathematics, another loves art, another thinks about nature, another asks strange questions, another notices tiny details that everyone else ignored. They may disagree, they may even argue. But something interesting can happen. They can discover ideas that none of them would have found alone. Diversity can create new possibilities. Nature loves diversity. Look at a forest. You don't see one giant field containing exactly one species of tree. You might find many kinds of plants, trees, moss, fungi, insects, birds, bacteria. Each organism has different characteristics. Why is that useful? Because environments change. A disease might attack one species. A drought might affect another. A new predator might change the balance. If an ecosystem contains many different organisms, it may have more ways to respond to change. This is one reason biodiversity matters. In nature, sameness can be efficient, but diversity can provide resilience. Diversity is also useful for human ideas. The same principle can apply to ideas. Suppose you are trying to invent a new machine. You have 10 engineers. If all 10 have exactly the same education, experiences, assumptions, and way of thinking, they may work very efficiently. But they may also make the same mistake. Now imagine the team includes people who understand different fields. One knows materials. One understands electronics. One studies biology. One specializes in mathematics. One is good at observing how humans actually use machines. Suddenly, the problem can be attacked from several directions. Different perspectives can reveal things that a single perspective misses. So diversity isn't necessarily the enemy of teamwork. Good teamwork can turn differences into advantages. Then why do we need standards? Now we have a puzzle. If diversity is good, and standards are good, which one should we choose? The answer is, use standards where compatibility matters. Use diversity where exploration and adaptation matter. Think about a soccer game. Everyone needs to agree on certain things. There needs to be a field. There need to be goals. There are rules. There is a ball. Imagine if one team decided, our goal is a triangle, and the other team said, our goal is invisible. You couldn't really play the same game. A shared standard creates the common ground. But within that common ground, players can be extremely different. One player may be fast. Another may be strong. Another may be excellent at passing. Another may be great at defending. The rules are standardized. The players don't have to be. That's a very important distinction. Here's an amazing example. Think about the internet. Billions of devices communicate with one another. Your computer can send information to a computer on the other side of the planet. But those computers may be made by different companies. They may use different operating systems. They may have different processors. They may be in completely different countries. So how can they communicate? Because underneath all that diversity are shared protocols and standards. Computers agree on ways to send, receive, organize, and interpret information. You could almost say, the internet is a world full of different computers speaking a collection of shared languages. The devices can remain different, but they agree on enough rules to communicate. That's a powerful combination. Diversity on the outside, compatibility underneath. Too much standardization can become a problem, but standards have a weakness too. Imagine that someone creates the perfect way to build bicycles. Then they say, from now on, every bicycle in the world must be exactly this shape. No experimentation, no changes, no unusual designs, no new materials, no different wheel sizes. That would make manufacturing easier. But it could also stop innovation. Someone might have an idea for a better bicycle, but the standard wouldn't allow it. So standards need to be designed carefully. Sometimes we want everyone to follow the same rule. Sometimes we want people to experiment outside the rule. And sometimes we need both. The most useful pattern. Standardize the connection. Here's a fascinating engineering idea. You don't always need everything to be identical. You only need the interfaces to match. Think about building with Lego bricks. The bricks can have different shapes, different colors, different purposes, but their connection points follow a standard. That means you can combine many different pieces into one structure. The diversity happens inside the system. The standardization happens where things connect. This idea appears everywhere in technology. What about language? Now let's return to Babel. Would the world be better if everyone spoke exactly one language? It would certainly make some kinds of communication easier. Travel might be easier. International meetings might be easier. But languages aren't just communication codes. They carry stories, history, humor, songs, ways of describing the world. Different languages can divide people sometimes, but they also represent different human experiences. So perhaps the goal shouldn't be make everyone speak the same language. Maybe the better goal is help people understand one another even when they speak different languages. Translation technology is one example. You don't have to eliminate linguistic diversity. You can build a bridge across it. The real lesson of Babel which gives us a different way to look at the ancient story. The problem wasn't simply that the people were different. The problem was that they could no longer coordinate. Difference itself isn't necessarily the enemy. In fact, difference can be incredibly valuable. The challenge is finding ways for different people, ideas, machines, and systems to work together. That's what standards can do. They create a shared language, a shared measurement, a shared protocol, a shared set of expectations. And once that common ground exists, people can be wonderfully different everywhere else. So when should things be the same? Let's try a little thought experiment. You are designing a new city. Should every traffic light work differently? Probably not. Drivers need predictable rules. Should every electrical outlet be completely different? Probably not. Should every measurement system use different units? Definitely not if you want engineers to cooperate easily. These are places where standardization is powerful. Now try another question. Should every scientist have exactly the same idea? No. Should every inventor use the same approach? No. Should every ecosystem contain only one species? Definitely not. Should every person think exactly the same way? That could be dangerous. These are places where diversity can be powerful. Same where it helps, different where it helps. So perhaps the real lesson isn't sameness is good and it isn't diversity is good. It's more interesting than that. The real question is, where does sameness help and where does difference help? If two things need to connect, shared standards can be incredibly useful. If a system needs new ideas, adaptation, or resilience, diversity can be incredibly useful. And sometimes we need both at the same time. Think about a modern computer. It has standards that allow its parts to communicate. But inside that framework are thousands of different components. Think about a city. It has standardized roads, signs, addresses, and building codes. But millions of people live completely different lives inside it. Think about science. Scientists share standards for measurements and evidence. But they are encouraged to challenge existing ideas and propose new ones. The framework can be standardized while the ideas inside it remain diverse. Back to the tower. So imagine the builders of Babel again. Thousands of people. One enormous project. One shared language. One set of goals. Their common language helped them coordinate. But perhaps there is another lesson for us. A successful society doesn't need everyone to be identical. It needs people to be able to understand one another, cooperate, and disagree productively. The next time you see something that everyone does the same way, ask, why is this standardized? What would happen if everyone did it differently? Then look at something where people are different. Ask, why is diversity useful here? What would we lose if everyone became the same? And finally, ask the most interesting question of all. Where should we standardize? And where should we encourage diversity? Because the smartest systems aren't necessarily the ones where everything is the same. And they aren't necessarily the ones where everything is different. They are the systems that know where to connect, where to agree, and where to leave room for difference. Perhaps that is the modern version of the Tower of Babel. Don't make everyone the same. Build enough common ground so that different people can build together. Connect through difference. Build together.